The afternoon sun spilled through the wide glass windows of Harlan's dojo, turning the polished wooden floors into a mirror of golden light. 20 children moved in unison across the mat, their crisp white uniforms snapping with each kick, each strike, each sharp shout of discipline. Parents lined the walls, some leaning forward eagerly, others half distracted on their phones, but all basking in the proud rhythm of their children learning the art of control and focus. Inside, it was a world of order, of structure, of discipline. But just outside the glass, pressed against the edges of shadow, stood a man who did not belong to this world. Darius Cole's frame was tall, built on a foundation of strength that time and hardship had tried and failed to strip away. His shoulders were still broad, his stance still upright, but his clothes told another story. A jacket too thin for the season, its fabric worn and frayed at the cuffs. Jeans stained from long nights of concrete beds. His beard was scruffy but clean, his eyes sharp and alive, though framed by lines etched from years of struggle. One hand held a plastic bag, clinking with the sound of aluminum cans he'd scavenged from alleys and trash bins. The other rested against the window, fingertips touching the glass as if he were reaching into another life. Inside, laughter bubbled suddenly, sharp and unkind. A group of older students near the back had noticed him. They whispered and snickered, nudging each other. "There he is again," one boy muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. "Sensei Bum," the nickname caught, repeated in hushed tones that quickly grew bolder. "Sensei Bum's back for class," another joked, striking a mocking stance. A ripple of laughter spread across the group. Even a couple of parents glanced sideways at the window, shaking their heads with thin smiles that carried no warmth. Darius didn't flinch. He didn't shout, didn't defend himself. He simply kept collecting cans, lowering one carefully into the bag, as if their cruel words were nothing more than wind passing by. But inside, each word cut like a blade. He had been called worse on the streets, but this was different. This was the sting of recognition, the reminder that once, long ago, he had stood on mats just like these, his name spoken with respect, his movements sharp and flawless. Now, he was a ghost at the window, reduced to a story whispered between children and parents who would never guess who he had once been. Still, there was something in his eyes that never dimmed. As the class continued, his gaze followed their movements. A misplaced foot here, a shoulder dropped too low there. He could see every mistake, every misstep, every subtle detail that separated clumsy imitation from mastery. His body twitched, almost unconsciously, as if the muscles still remembered the rhythm, even if the world had forgotten him. A little girl stumbled on a turn, nearly losing her balance. Through the glass, she glanced up, just for a heartbeat, and her eyes locked on his. Darius tilted his head ever so slightly and shifted his stance, mimicking the correction she needed. She blinked, hesitated, then tried again. Perfect. Her face lit up, a small spark of pride, and for that instant, it was as though the glass between them had disappeared. But the moment passed quickly. Her instructor clapped for attention, and she turned back to the class. Darius lowered his eyes, gripping the bag of cans a little tighter. His heart thudded against his ribs, not from shame, but from something more dangerous, something like hope. The whispers inside continued, the cruel nickname still floating through the air, but he no longer heard them. Instead, he heard the faint echoes of his past, the roar of crowds at Tia. National tournaments, the voice of his late wife urging him on, the crack of boards splitting beneath his fists, memories that refused to die, even if the world wished to bury them. What was he doing here, night after night, standing in the shadows of a dojo that wasn't his? He didn't fully know. Maybe it was the rhythm of the kiais, the sound of young voices shouting with determination. Maybe it was the way the mat smelled faintly of sweat and discipline, a scent that once defined his life. Or maybe it was that deep, unrelenting pull of something unfinished. Whatever it was, he couldn't leave. Not yet. As the children bowed at the end of class, their voices echoing in unison, Darius turned away, disappearing back into the alley with his bag of cans. But behind him, through the whispers and the laughter, one question hung heavier than the rest. Who was the man at the window, and why did he watch so closely? The answer, when it came, would shatter everything they thought they knew about him, and about themselves. The dojo emptied into the cooling air of early evening, children tumbling out in clusters of chatter and laughter, their white uniforms half untucked and wrinkled now from sweat and play. Parents gathered them up, fussing with bags and belts, calling for shoes that had been abandoned in the rush of excitement. The wooden doors swung open and shut, letting bursts of bright voices spill into the quiet street before fading again. Behind the building, in the narrow strip of concrete by the dumpster, Darius Cole knelt down, arranging the cans he'd collected into neat rows before sliding them into his plastic sack. His movements were careful, deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though order itself was a kind of dignity he refused to surrender. He had done this for years, turning scraps into survival, but there was still a quiet grace in the way his large hands handled each crushed aluminum piece as if it mattered. From the corner of his vision, he caught sight of a small figure slipping through the dojo's side door. At first, he thought it was just another curious glance from a child daring to peek at the man their parents whispered about. But then the boy walked closer, not with hesitation, but with wide-eyed certainty, clutching something in both hands. "Hi," the boy said, his voice bright and innocent. His sneakers scraped lightly against the pavement as he came closer. He couldn't have been older than 8, his hair cropped close, his face still round with youth. He looked at the plastic bag of cans with open curiosity. "Are you collecting those?" Darius straightened, his height making him tower over the boy, but his voice came out soft, low, and even. "Yes, recycling." "Oh." The boy tilted his head, surprised perhaps at the calmness in his tone, the lack of roughness he'd expected. "My mom says, you sleep back here sometimes." Darius didn't look away, didn't grow defensive. He simply nodded once. "Sometimes. It's quiet here." The boy chewed on his lip, then glanced back at the dojo door as if to make sure no one was watching. Slowly, he pulled a sandwich from his pocket, slightly squashed but wrapped in foil. His small hands held it out, trembling just enough to betray his nervousness. "This is my extra lunch sandwich. My mom always packs 2, but I'm not hungry." The alley seemed to fall still, the traffic in the distance muffled, the hum of the dojo fading into silence. Darius looked at the boy, searching his face for mockery, for the kind of cruelty he'd grown used to from others. But there was none, only earnest eyes and a kind of stubborn generosity that felt almost foreign. He reached out slowly, accepting the sandwich with both hands as though it were something fragile. He bowed slightly from the waist, the old gesture rising from instinct, from a lifetime of respect ingrained in him. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying more weight than the boy could possibly understand. "That is very kind." The boy's face lit up with delight at the bow, as if he'd just been included in a secret ritual. "You're welcome." For a moment, it felt like the world had shifted. Darius felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't allowed himself in years, a glimmer of warmth, of being seen not as a shadow, but as a person. But the moment was cut short. "Malik!" A sharp voice sliced through the air. Both turned toward the door. A tall teenager with a blue belt tied tight around his waist stood there, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Travis Wilson, 17, the dojo's most competitive student, his pride sharpened into arrogance. "Coming, Travis?" the boy called back, his voice small now. He looked at Darius almost apologetically. "Sorry." Then he hurried toward the door. Travis lingered a moment longer, glaring at Darius with open disdain. "You need to stop hanging around here, man," he sneered. "You're freaking people out. What, you think you're learning karate by staring through the window? Hey, everybody," he shouted back into the dojo, loud enough for the few who remained to hear. "Sensei Bum thinks he's going to be a black belt." Laughter erupted from inside, cruel and echoing. Travis smirked, enjoying the sting of it, then slammed the door shut with a force meant to dismiss. The alley was silent again. Darius remained still, his expression carved in stone, though deep inside the words had landed like knives. He looked down at the sandwich in his hands, unwrapped a corner, and took a slow bite. It was nothing special, plain peanut butter and jellies, but it tasted like something rare, something priceless. He chewed in silence, his eyes lifting once more toward the window where the students trained, where laughter had turned cruel, but where a single boy had reached past the divide with kindness. And for the first time in years, Darius wondered if the glass between him and the world was starting to crack. The dojo smelled of polish and sweat, the way all places of discipline carried a hint of both effort and pride. Mats stretched neatly across the floor, their edges crisp and sharp, a stage where order ruled every movement. The younger children had gone home, leaving the dojo to the teenagers, older, stronger, hungrier for recognition. They stood in pairs, sparring lightly under the watchful eye of Sensei Harland, whose calm presence carried authority without ever needing to raise his voice. Through the tall side windows, dusk leaked in, painting the floor in streaks of gold. Just beyond the glass, Darius stood where he always stood, near the shadows, his bag of cans at his feet, his broad shoulders outlined by the dim light outside. His eyes followed the sparring with the same intensity a soldier gives to the battlefield, every mistake etched into his memory, every misstep felt in his bones. The first whisper started near the back, just a hiss of a laugh between two boys, but it grew quickly. "He's back," one of them muttered, jerking his chin toward the window. "Sensei Bum." The words spread like wildfire. Heads turned. Smirks appeared. Even a few parents lingering near the door glanced at the window and then at each other with uneasy amusement. Soon the dojo floor was alive, not with the rhythm of discipline, but with the rhythm of cruelty. Travis Wilson, blue belt tied sharp around his waist, seized the moment. His tall frame and cocky grin commanded attention, and he knew it. He stopped mid-spar, throwing his arms wide. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a voice dripping with mock ceremony, "welcome our guest instructor, Sensei Bum." He bent into an exaggerated bow, nearly doubling over with mock respect. The room erupted in laughter. Some students doubled over, some clapped. A few even mimicked drunken karate stances, wobbling across the mat. The cruelty of it echoed off the walls, filling the once disciplined room with something ugly and sour. Darius didn't move. He didn't shout back or storm off. He stood still, his face calm, his hands loose at his sides. But his jaw tightened, the muscle flexing once before he forced it still. On the inside, though, the insult sank deep. He had fought in tournaments where men twice his size tried to break him. He had survived battlefields. He had endured nights in alleys where hunger gnawed at his ribs. But this laughter, this careless dismissal, cut differently. It wasn't about pain, it was about erasure. They weren't mocking his clothes, they were mocking his worth. Only one voice broke from the chorus. "Stop it," Malik said, small and uncertain, but loud enough for those around him to hear. His little fists were balled at his sides, his eyes flashing with something fiercer than his years. "He's not doing anything to you." Travis sneered, ruffling Malik's hair like he was swatting away a mosquito. "Relax, kid. We're just having fun." He turned back to his audience. Maybe he thinks he's learning karate by standing out there. Maybe next week he'll be ready for his black belt in dumpster dew. The laughter swelled again. Darius's gaze didn't flinch from the mat. His eyes, steady and unblinking, landed not on Travis but on one of the younger girls struggling with her kata. Her pivot was off again, too much weight on the wrong foot. Without thinking, without hesitation, he shifted his stance outside, his body mirroring the correction she needed. He tilted his head. Subtle, but clear. She noticed. Through the laughter and noise, her eyes found his. She copied his adjustment, turned again, and this time, perfect. She beamed, grinning with pride, and for a fleeting second, she gave him a small wave before returning to practice. And in that moment, the noise around him faded. The cruelty, the laughter, the whispered nickname, all of it slipped into the background. Because even if the rest of the world saw a bum in the shadows, one child had seen something else, a teacher. From the far corner, Sensei Harlan stood with arms folded, his sharp eyes watching not the students, but the man outside the window. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered, heavy with thought. The laughter died down eventually, drowned out by the call for focus, but the sting of it lingered in the air like smoke. Inside, the students sparred again, their movements snapping and breaking against the mats. Outside, Darius bent down, collected his cans, and disappeared once more into the night. No one noticed the way Harlan's eyes followed him until he was gone, and no one knew that this was only the beginning of something none of them could have imagined. The dojo was nearly silent after the evening class had ended. The mats had been swept, the lights dimmed, and the last of the parents had bundled their children into cars that disappeared down the street. The echo of laughter and footsteps had long faded, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint creak of the wooden floor as Sensei Harlan locked the front door. He stood there for a moment, leaning against the frame, arms crossed over his chest. His salt and pepper hair clung slightly to his forehead, damp from hours of teaching, and his mind wasn't on the drills or sparring rounds of the day. It was on the man outside the window, the man who had stood as still as stone while the room filled. Ed with cruel laughter, the man who had corrected a girl's pivot without a word, his eyes teaching in silence where his voice had been silenced by ridicule. Harlan didn't scare easily, but something about that man unsettled him, not in a dangerous way but in a way that demanded understanding. He'd taught martial arts for over 30 years. He had seen arrogance, hunger, desperation, even brokenness in his students and their families. But the stillness of that man's eyes, the dignity that hadn't cracked under mockery, that was rare. Slipping through the side door, Harlan stepped into the cool evening air. The faint smell of rain lingered, though the sky was still dry, Dark clouds gathered above as if the heavens were waiting for something. He rounded the corner of the building and found him. Darius Cole sat on the curb near the dumpster, back straight despite the concrete digging into him, a battered paperback open in his lap. He read slowly, lips moving faintly with each line, as though savoring the words. Beside him, his bag of cans clinked softly whenever he shifted. Harlan paused, studying him before speaking. "Mind if I join you?" His voice was even, carrying no judgment. Darius looked up, startled for just a moment before his composure returned. His eyes flickered with suspicion, then resignation. He closed the book carefully, tucking a piece of string between the pages. "It's your curb," he said, though his tone wasn't bitter. Harlan lowered himself down onto the curb, leaving a respectful space between them. He placed 2 bottles of water on the ground, nudging one toward Darius with a nod. "Long day, hydration helps." Darius hesitated, then accepted the bottle. "Thank you." For a while, they sat in silence, the only sound the distant hum of traffic and the faint chorus of crickets beginning their night songs. Finally, Harlan spoke. "That advice you gave Caitlin earlier, about her pivot, it was good, precise." Darius's eyes flicked. Carrad then dropped to the bottle in his hands. "Force of habit," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to interfere. You've trained before." Harlan didn't phrase it as a question, he already knew. A long silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. At last, Darius nodded once. "A long time ago." Harlan studied him in the dim light. His posture, the efficiency of his movements, the way he carried himself even in rags, it all screamed of discipline that didn't fade with time. "You're welcome to watch from inside, rather than through the glass," Harlan offered. "Might be more comfortable." Surprise flickered across Darius's face before he quickly hid it. "That's generous, but I doubt everyone would welcome it. Parents talk, students whisper. You know this." "Probably," Harlan admitted, his voice honest. "But that's their loss. The offer stands." He rose, brushing off his pants. "And for what it's worth, that spot behind the building, it's safe. No one will bother you there. At least you'll stay dry if it rains." Darius looked up at him, his weathered face caught in the halo of the security light. For the first time, something like gratitude flickered in his eyes, though it was guarded, cautious, as if kindness had become a language he barely remembered. Harlan didn't wait for thanks. He just gave a small nod and walked back toward the door, his footsteps fading into the silence. Darius stared after him long after he'd gone, the unopened bottle of water still in his hand. His heart felt heavy, tangled between weariness and something he dared not name. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was close. And as the night deepened, Darius knew one truth he couldn't ignore. The dojo was no longer just a place he passed by. It had become a place pulling him in, step by cautious step. The next Saturday arrived with an unusual buzz inside Harlan's dojo. It was open mat day, a chance for students, parents, and even curious neighbors to step onto the training floor, free from the rigid structure of normal classes. No ranks, no drills, just practice and play. The air was thick with chatter as shoes were kicked off, bags piled near the walls, and children darted across the mats like restless energy bottled too long. Parents filled the benches that lined the walls, sipping coffee, murmuring to one another. The whispers weren't just about their kids, they were about him. Darius Cole, the man who lingered in the shadows collecting cans, the man some children called Sensei Bum, the man who had somehow become a ghost story whispered between classes. And now, here he was. He stepped through the front door with quiet determination, his worn jacket hanging heavy on his shoulders, his bag of cans left behind for once. The dojo seemed to freeze for a moment, the hum of voices dipping into silence as dozens of eyes locked onto him. His presence was jarring, like a shadow stepping into the sun. Whispers rippled quickly. That's him. Why is he here? Did Harlan invite him? Some parents frowned openly, their disapproval sharp, while others leaned in with curiosity. Children stared, wide-eyed, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Travis Wilson, standing in the center of a small circle of older students, smirked the moment he saw him. His voice carried easily, dripping with mockery. "Well, look who decided to join us, Sensei Bum in the flesh." He made an exaggerated bow toward Darius, laughter spilling from his friends. "Here to show us some of your famous dumpster dude techniques?" Snickers broke out across the room, cruel and cutting. Even a few parents chuckled, shaking their heads. Darius didn't react. He stood still, his hands loose at his sides, his posture upright, his face unreadable. The sting of their words was real, like barbs against old wounds, but he didn't give them the satisfaction of flinching. His eyes swept the room, calm, steady, until they found Harland across the mats. The dojo master's gaze was firm, not mocking, not pitying. He gave the slightest nod, a silent invitation. Travis wasn't finished. "Come on," he taunted, strutting forward. "You've been watching long enough. Show us something. A kata, a kick, anything. Or are you scared?" His voice rose, playing to the crowd. "What's the matter? Forget how to fight when you lost your house." The laughter grew, but it faltered almost instantly when a smaller voice cut through the noise. "Stop it." Malik stepped forward, his small fists clenched, his face flushed. His voice trembled but carried a conviction that silenced even the boldest chuckles. "He's not hurting anyone. He helped Caitlin with her kata last week. You're just being mean." The room went uncomfortably quiet. Parents shifted in their seats, some looking guilty, others irritated. Travis scoffed, ruffling Malik's hair as if dismissing him. "Relax, kid, we're just having fun." But Harland had seen enough. He stepped forward, his presence alone commanding silence. "That's enough, Travis." His voice was firm, final. Then he turned to Darius, his tone softening. "Actually, Mr. Cole, I was hoping you might demonstrate something for us today. Just a kata, no sparring." The tension in the room sharpened instantly. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Parents exchanged uneasy looks. The students shifted, curiosity written across their faces. All eyes fell on Darius. For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze moved across the crowd. The skeptical parents, the mocking teens, the few hopeful eyes that looked at him with something else, something like faith. Malik's small face shone with absolute belief. At last, Darius nodded once. Just one. He stepped onto the mat. Slowly, deliberately, he slipped off his worn shoes, placing them neatly at the edge. His socked feet pressed against the tatami as if reacquainting themselves with an old friend. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, breathing in deeply, centering himself. A few snickers broke the silence, but they died quickly when Darius began to move. The transformation was instant. The man who had seemed worn and ragged just moments before suddenly flowed with a grace that silenced the room. Each movement was precise, sharp, yet fluid, his strikes cutting the air with authority, his turns balanced with perfect control. The kata was not basic. It was advanced, one that even the older students recognized but had never mastered. His body told a story with every pivot, every block, every strike. Years of discipline, pain, endurance, mastery. The laughter evaporated, replaced by stunned silence. Even the parents leaned forward, breath caught in their throats. Children's eyes widened, mouths hanging open. By the time Darius reached the final sequence, a powerful strike that seemed to vibrate through the very floor, the room was utterly still. And then, as he stood in perfect stillness, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, a single sound broke through. Clapping. Malik, his small hands smacking together furiously, his face shining with pride. "I told you," he whispered, his voice trembling with vindication. Others joined hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, until the dojo thundered with applause. Darius bowed deeply, first to Harlan, then to the room. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Thank you for allowing me to share." He turned to leave, his shoes waiting quietly at the edge of the mat, but the dojo was no longer laughing. They were watching, and they would never see him the same way again. The dojo buzzed long after. Our Darius left the mat. Parents whispered furiously among themselves, some wide-eyed with amazement, others wary, suspicious of what they had just witnessed. Children clustered together, replaying his movements in jerky imitations, their voices bubbling with awe. And in the center of it all, Travis Wilson stood silent, his jaw tight, his smirk gone. For the first time in years, he hadn't been the one in control of the room. The applause that had filled the air still echoed faintly in Darius's ears as he laced up his worn shoes by the door. His hands were steady, but inside, something trembled, an old, familiar fire he thought had long been extinguished. He had kept his promise to himself, one kata, nothing more. Yet in those few minutes, the life he had tried so hard to bury had risen uninvited and demanded to be seen. "Wait!" Travis's voice called out, breaking the hum of chatter. The tall teenager strode toward him, his blue belt swinging at his waist. "That was fine, pretty moves, but kata is just choreography. Anyone can practice a dance long enough to make it look good." His voice grew louder, pitched for the crowd. "Martial arts is about application, so how about some sparring?" Gasps rippled through the room. Parents exchanged alarmed looks. Children leaned forward, excitement sparking in their eyes. A challenge. Sensei Harlan stepped quickly between them, his presence firm. Enough, Travis, this isn't the time or the place. But Darius, who had been tying the final knot on his shoes, paused. He didn't rise to the bait. He simply looked at Travis, eyes steady, expression calm. A good martial artist, he said evenly, knows when to engage and when to walk away. Travis scoffed, his pride pricked raw. So you are scared. Darius smiled for the first time that night, small, quiet, but undeniably real. No, I'm disciplined. He bowed slightly to the room. His movements filled with respect, then turned to leave. For a heartbeat, it seemed like the tension might dissolve, but then, from the far side of the mats, a voice cut through, sharper than the rest. My father says no one's touched the record in years. All eyes swung toward Miguel, one of the advanced students, who was pointing toward the wooden stand tucked neatly in the corner of the dojo, the board-breaking frame. The record's 8 boards, Miguel continued, his voice brimming with challenge. Set by Sensei Harlan himself, 12 years ago. He glanced at Travis with a daring grin. Why not let him try? The dojo filled with murmurs. Parents shifted in their seats, suddenly intrigued. The younger students gasped. Travis's smirk returned like a mask snapping into place. Perfect idea, he said, his tone thick with sarcasm. Unless, of course, Sensei Bum doesn't want to break a nail. Harlan's eyes narrowed. That's enough. He was about to shut it down, but he caught sight of Darius's face. The man wasn't angry, he wasn't defensive. He simply looked thoughtful. The silence grew heavy as every gaze pinned itself on Darius. He had spent years hiding in shadows, reduced to whispers and laughter. Now the weight of expectation pressed on him from every corner of the room. Finally, he straightened, pulling his jacket tighter around his shoulders. His voice was calm, steady, carrying across the mats with the authority of someone who had stood in rings and stadiums where entire crowds had watched his every move. If it will help you understand what martial arts is truly about, he said, I'll try. The room erupted. Students scrambled closer. Parents leaned forward. The stand was dragged from the corner, the boards stacked with trembling anticipation. 1, 2, 3, until 8 gleamed in the bright dojo lights, lined perfectly, waiting to test him. As Darius removed his jacket and stepped onto the mat once more, silence fell over the dojo. The laughter was gone. The whispers were gone. All that remained was the sharp edge of suspense. And when he squared his shoulders before the boards, breathing in deeply, eyes closing as his body settled into perfect stillness, the thought crept through every mind in the room. Was this homeless man about to shatter not just wood, but everything they thought they knew about him? The dojo seemed to hold its breath. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt too loud against the silence as the board-breaking stand was placed at the center of the mat. 8 pine boards, each an inch thick, stacked neatly in the frame. The record, the line no one had crossed in over a decade. Darius stood before it, his socked feet pressing into the tatami as if rooting himself into the earth. He rolled his shoulders once, the faintest crack breaking the tension in his muscles. Then, with slow precision, he removed his jacket and folded it carefully, placing it on the edge of the mat. The room grew stiller with every movement, parents leaning forward, children whispering in awe, some clutching each other's sleeves. From the corner, Travis crossed his arms, a smirk twitching at the edges of his mouth. This is it, he muttered, loud enough for his circle of friends. Let's see if Sensei Bum is more than just a pretty dance. But his voice didn't carry the confidence it once had. Darius's eyes slid shut. He breathed in deeply, his chest rising, then lowering with deliberate control. To the crowd, it looked like nothing more than preparation. But inside, memories flickered. A dimly lit tournament hall, the roar of a crowd chanting his name, his wife in the front row, her smile brighter than the stage lights, the sharp crack of boards splitting under his strike, followed by applause that rattled the rafters. And then, another memory. A hospital bed, her hand cold in his, the bills piling like bricks on his back, nights on hard sidewalks, the laughter of strangers who saw only a man who had fallen. Now here he was again, not for glory, not for trophies, for something far more fragile, far more sacred, dignity. When his eyes opened, they were steady, calm, the eyes of a man who had been broken by life, but not defeated. He raised his right arm, bent at the elbow, positioning it above the boards. The dojo was so quiet that even the smallest shuffle of feet echoed. His breath slowed, his muscles coiled, his focus narrowed to a single point, the exact center of the stack. And then it came, the strike. His arm drove down with explosive precision, his whole body moving as one, shoulders, hips, legs, every ounce of strength and focus surging through the strike. His voice ripped from his lungs in a thunderous kai-ai, a primal shout that seemed to shake the very walls. The sound that followed was deafening. Crack! The boards didn't just break. They shattered, splintering into two clean halves that fell neatly away from the frame, scattering fragments across the mat. The impact echoed like a gunshot, reverberating through the stunned silence. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then one voice broke through. "He did it!" Malik shouted, leaping to his feet, his small hands clapping furiously. His cry sparked the crowd, and in an instant, the dojo erupted. Cheers exploded. Parents stood, clapping hard, some with tears in their eyes. Children screamed with excitement, pounding the floor with their fists and feet. Sensei Harlan's face broke into a rare, wide smile, pride shining in his eyes. Even the doubters in the back found themselves caught up in the moment, their skepticism drowned by the undeniable truth they had just witnessed. Darius stood amidst it all, his arm still extended, his chest rising with steady breaths. Slowly he lowered his hand, bowed deeply to the room, and stepped back from the stand. His eyes found Malik first. The boy's face was radiant, shining with vindication, as though this victory belonged to him too. Then Darius's gaze shifted to Travis. The teenager's smirk was gone, his mouth hung open, his pride crushed beneath the weight of what he had just seen. For the first time, Travis couldn't hide it, respect. And for the first time in years, Darius allowed himself to feel something he thought was long lost. Not glory, not fame, belonging. The dojo had laughed at him. They had called him Sensei Bum. But tonight, they had seen the truth. And nothing would ever be the same again. The applause still echoed in the rafters long after the boards had shattered. Children swarmed the mat, touching the splintered pieces as though they were relics from a legend. Parents clapped Darius on the back, their praise spilling over in words that felt almost too much, too fast. But even as the room buzzed with excitement, something colder stirred at the edges. Near the back wall, a cluster of parents whispered together, their smiles thin, their eyes darting toward Darius with unease. Jennifer Adams, Malik's mother, was radiant with pride, but beside her, Sarah Miller's mouth was set in a sharp line. "This is inappropriate," Sarah muttered to the woman next to her. "He's homeless. He lives behind a dumpster, for God's sake, and now he's on the mat with our kids?" The other woman shifted uncomfortably. "But you saw what he did. No one's ever broken more than 7 in front of us. He broke 8 like it was nothing." "Talent doesn't erase reality," Sarah snapped. "We know nothing about him. Where's he from? What's his past? You want someone like that teaching your child discipline?" Her voice was sharp enough that a few nearby parents turned to listen. Across the dojo, Travis's father, Mark Wilson, overheard. His expression darkened immediately. "You're right," he agreed, stepping closer to the small group. "This is reckless. James Harlan may trust him, but trust doesn't keep our children safe. For all we know, he has a criminal record. Men don't end up on the street without reason." Jennifer bristled, turning to face him. "For all you know, he's a veteran. For all you know, he's lost more than you could imagine. Did you see Malik tonight? Did you see how much confidence he's gained just from that man believing in him?" Mark's lips curled in disdain. Confidence isn't worth gambling with safety. The debate spread like a ripple through the crowd, voices rising in overlapping waves. Some parents defended Darius passionately, pointing to the discipline in his movements, the respect in his demeanor. Others whispered their discomfort louder now, no longer afraid to voice it. The room that had been united in awe moments earlier fractured into two camps, admiration and suspicion. On the mat, Darius stood still, the storm swirling around him but never touching his face. He gathered the broken halves of the boards, stacking them neatly, as though tidiness could quiet the noise. Children still hovered near him, asking questions, laughing, imitating his movements, but the voices of the parents grew sharper, cutting through the joy. "Mr. Cole," Harlan called gently, stepping forward with a hand raised. "Would you join me in my office?" It wasn't a dismissal, it was protection. Darius nodded once, rising to his full height, and followed Harlan from the floor. The chatter in the room followed him like a trail of judgment. Some eyes softened with respect, others hardened with doubt. Inside the office, Harlan closed the door and exhaled, running a hand over his face. "You did more than break boards tonight," he said. "You broke through every wall those kids had built around themselves. But the parents," he shook his head, "they're not all ready." Darius leaned against the wall, His arms folded, his expression calm but his eyes shadowed. "They're right to question me," he said simply. "I'm a stranger. I've been invisible long enough that when people finally look, all they see is what's missing. A home, a job, a past I don't parade around." Harlan studied him. "And what do you see when you look at yourself?" For the first time, Darius hesitated. His eyes dropped, his jaw tightening. A man trying not to waste the second chance that somehow fell into his hands. The silence between them stretched heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with truth too raw to dismiss. Outside the office, the murmur of voices rose again, some angry, some curious, some already reshaping the story of the night. And in that storm of opinion, Darius realized the greatest battle wasn't against boards, or even against Travis's arrogance. It was against perception itself. Respect had been won on the mat, but acceptance, that would be war. The next morning, the dojo's triumph had already slipped into controversy. What should have been a story of inspiration, the homeless man who broke the record, turned into whispers at coffee shops, murmurs in church pews, and hurried phone calls between parents who weren't ready to accept what they had seen. By Monday, the whispers had a name: Mark Wilson. Travis's father wasted no time. He cornered other parents in parking lots, pulled them aside after school drop-offs, and sent a string of late-night messages. His words were sharp, heavy with warning. "We can't trust someone like that. We don't know his history. What if he snaps? What if he hurts someone? Harlan is reckless for letting him near our kids." And people listened. Within 2 days, a group of parents gathered in Sarah Miller's kitchen, voices hushed but tense. Laptops glowed on the counter, coffee cups cooled untouched, and one by one they began searching. Old tournament records, military registries, local news archives, anything that carried the name Darius Cole. At first, they found pieces of brilliance, clippings from martial arts tournaments in the early 2000s, headlines that read "Cole dominates national finals" or "The man with iron hands." There were photographs of him in peak form, younger, leaner, standing on podiums with medals draped across his chest, pride shining in his eyes. But then came the darker fragments. A grainy video clip from a tournament in 2005. Darius, mid-fight, executing a strike so fierce it dropped his opponent instantly. The other man screamed, clutching his arm as referees rushed in. The caption below the clip read, "Disqualification after broken arm controversy." The parents replayed it again and again, ignoring the context, ignoring the fact that the official ruling had cleared him of intentional harm. To them, it was proof, evidence of danger. "He's violent," Sarah said flatly, her voice cutting through the group. "This isn't discipline, it's aggression. That's the man Harlan is bringing into our children's lives." Mark leaned back, satisfaction flickering in his eyes. "Exactly. And that's just the start. Dig deeper. You'll find more." By Wednesday, rumors spread faster than facts. Parents whispered at the edge of the mat while their children practiced. Some pulled their kids out of class entirely, citing vague safety concerns. Inside the dojo, Darius felt the shift. Students still came to him with questions, still watched him with shining eyes, but their parents' gazes grew colder. Conversations stopped when he entered the room. Smiles became tight, clipped. Trust began to crumble. One evening after class, Travis lingered as the others left. His face was pale, conflicted. He shoved his phone into his pocket before Darius could see the video paused on the screen. "My dad found stuff about you," Travis muttered. "He's showing it to people. Says you broke a guy's arm on purpose. Says you got thrown out of competition." Darius set down the pads he'd been carrying, his expression unreadable. "Your father's half right. The arm broke. I was disqualified, but not for intent. Injuries happen when you play with force." Travis shifted uncomfortably. "He says you disappeared after that you couldn't handle losing." Silence pressed between them. Darius finally spoke, his voice low, steady. "Life didn't take me out because of a fight, Travis. It took me out because it doesn't care how many medals you've won when you're standing at your wife's hospital bed begging for one more day. That's what broke me, not karate." The boy's eyes widened, guilt flickering across his face. But before he could answer, the dojo door slammed open. Harlan entered, his jaw tight, holding a flyer in his hand. The words, "Keep our kids safe, no to Cole," blazed in bold letters across the page. "They're organizing," Harlan said grimly, dropping the flyer on the table between them. "Parents, a petition, maybe even the press." Darius stared at the paper for a long moment, then quietly pulled his jacket over his shoulders. His face was calm, but there was a heaviness in his eyes. "Then maybe I should go before I tear your dojo apart." Harlan's voice hardened. "Don't you dare. You didn't crawl back from the street just to let fear send you running again." But Darius said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any defense. Because deep down he knew the truth. It wasn't the boards he had broken that night. It was the fragile wall he had built around himself. And now, Young was looking inside. Rain lashed against the dojo windows the night of the community meeting. Parents filled the room, their coats dripping, their voices sharp, their eyes flicking between Harland and the man they'd come to judge. Reporters hovered near the back, cameras poised, waiting for a spectacle. At the center of it all stood Darius Cole. He didn't look like a man preparing for battle. His clothes were plain, his shoes worn, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. But there was something in his posture, shoulders squared, chin lifted, that carried the weight of someone who had been here before, on different stages, in darker arenas. Harlan called for quiet, but the room only hushed when Darius stepped forward. His voice, when it came, wasn't booming or angry. It was steady, low, but strong enough to reach every corner. You've seen me outside your windows. You've seen me collect cans. You've seen me sleep near your dumpsters. And you've asked the same question. Why is he here? The silence thickened. No one moved. I'll tell you, Darius continued, because once I had everything you expect a man to have. A home, a career, a wife who believed in me. I was a national champion. People cheered my name. And then life decided trophies don't pay hospital bills. Medals don't fight cancer. Love doesn't stop a body from failing. His voice caught just for a second, but he pressed on. When she died, I lost more than my partner. I lost my compass. I walked away from the ring, from the dojo, from everyone. I thought disappearing was easier than watching myself fall, and I fell far. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some parents shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, listening harder. You want to know if I'm dangerous? Darius asked, his eyes sweeping the room. Yes, I am. To boards, to doubt, to the idea that a man's worth can be measured by the clothes he wears or the dress he doesn't have. He stepped toward the stack of pine boards already waiting in the corner, set up by Harland earlier. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. You've heard the rumors. You've seen the clip of me breaking a man's arm. What you didn't see was me holding his hand after, making sure he was okay, visiting him in the hospital. What you didn't see was the referee clearing me of intent. You only saw what someone wanted you to see. He placed one hand on the boards, feeling the grain beneath his palm. The crowd leaned in, their tension vibrating through the room. I'm not here to prove myself with medals or titles. I'm here because your children, your sons and daughters, look at me and see more than a bum behind a dumpster. They see discipline, they see patience, they see someone who refuses to stay down. He stepped back, positioned himself before the stack. 9 boards this time, one more than Harlan's long-standing record. The reporters raised their cameras. Parents whispered frantically. Darius inhaled once, his chest expanding, then brought his arm down in a perfect arc. His kai-eye ripped through the air, followed by the thunderclap of splitting wood. Crack! 9 boards broke clean, halves falling in unison, scattering across the mat. The sound echoed like a verdict. For a moment there was nothing. No applause, no whispers, just stunned silence. Then, one by one, the children began to clap. Malik first, his small hands slapping together furiously, then Caitlin, then half the class, until the sound built into thunder. Even parents who had come ready to condemn found their resistance cracking under the weight of what they'd witnessed. Darius didn't bask in the applause. He simply bowed, sweat beading on his brow, and spoke again. I'm not asking for your pity. I'm not asking for your approval. All I ask is a chance to teach what I know, that strength isn't what you break, strength is what you survive, and if your children learn that, they'll carry something no one can take away from them. He stepped back. The applause swelled again, this time with more voices, more conviction. Even some of his loudest critics hesitated, caught between their prejudice and the undeniable truth before them. And in the doorway, Mark Wilson stood frozen, his son Travis at his side. Travis's eyes were shining, wide with respect, his lips parting just enough to whisper words his father didn't want to hear. Dad, he's a real sensei. The crowd roared on, the record broken, the doubts fractured. Darius Cole, once laughed at, once discarded, had shattered more than wood that night. He had shattered their preconceptions of human worth.